Okay, this is good. All right, we're calling the Policy Committee meeting for May 26th to order. And have we been posted?
Yes, we have.
Thank you. I'll see if there's any citizens. I do not believe so. Thank you, staff, Joe and Todd, for being here. And so we'll go then right to our action items. And the minutes from a meeting where actually wasn't on the committee yet, but are in front of you from the April meeting. Are there any changes or corrections to those? Then I'll entertain a motion to approve those, I suppose, or they could be approved as stands. Sometimes we do that. Do you have a preference?
No,
All right, hearing no corrections, we'll just say they are approved as stands.
that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine, for a committee to do that, that's fine. All right, and so then what we're looking at then is the student records policy 5125 and 5145.1. And this is the second time, right? Even though it's my first time, I think. Well, Todd, maybe we should just let you update us on this. Let's see. That's all right.
5125.
Yeah, look at 5125 first, and then we'll look at the other.
This is just, it deals with recruitment, and I think, Joe, did you work on this one? Joe has been working, kind of
Student
is
records.
filling in Jim Hasley's shoes and working on policies.
Right.
So he's been going through each of our various policies that impact students, and has been working on this change.
Then, Joe, maybe we should ask you to highlight what you see, and I think they're in red on our thing, but as changes and why they're there? Is that
Correct.
fair? Okay.
Just in going back to the last time the policy was reviewed and revised by the board, and then looking at some updates in laws and some suggested best practices, we wanted to clarify what a health record was, what directory data was. Wanted to make sure that, given the nature sometimes of open records requests, that we wanted to make sure that we were as protective as we could be of our students' information. In addition to that, the school district of Waukesha uses the Oasis special education software system, which it's required that we have IEPs in the district. Oasis is a fantastic program for us to use to generate those IEPs. They keep us in compliance. In essence, what we're doing is creating an electronic record every time we do that, and there is guidance in IDEA as far as how long you need to retain those student records. So we wanted to seek some clarification on what it means to keep that as a pupil record, but then also how to position that document as a district record and not a pupil record after students graduate with us. Because in essence, I mean, in theory, as long as Oasis is around, you have that record there, but this policy now includes some steps for us to take it from being a pupil record to not a pupil record, and then maintaining it for federal audit purposes in the future. So we wanted to clean that up and add that as well.
Okay, well, that's a nice cursory summary. Questions?
You know, Joe, I question this. On page 2, although it's crossed out as page 2, way at the bottom, directory data D2, it says.
Yep.
Directory data, in addition to the above data, also includes a student's phone number only for the purpose of responding to direct requests from military recruiters. And then it goes on to say, on the next page, institutions of higher learning, etc. Okay. Then way back in the, I don't know, it looks like it's 3. It's called Release of Student Directory Data, and it's 3C, and it's in red. Well, it says there, high school principals shall provide upon request by military recruiters or institutions of higher learning, name, addresses, and telephone numbers. So that's different than the thing on page 2 where it says phone numbers only. So which is it?
If I can direct you to number 1 on page 2 of directory data.
number 1 on page 2.
The original definition of directory data, that includes name and address.
You
But
mean
it goes beyond that,
the cover
though, too.
page? The cover page?
Page 2, where you just were looking
Yes,
about the
yes.
telephone number only,
Yeah,
One.
so D1,
That includes a lot.
that includes the name, address, and all those things.
Yep.
And then D2 says for military recruiters, et cetera, they may get the phone number as well.
but then over here it says
Name, address, and phone
phone
number.
number, yeah,
Correct.
so what's the difference? Or is there a difference, or I don't
Well, name and
understand.
address is included in the directory data for all interested groups, but in addition to that, the,
Yeah, one pertains to the release of data, and one defines what the directory data is. So, on page 2, section D, you're getting the definition of directory data as it pertains to military. And then if you look at the second page, higher learning, law
Right.
enforcement, district attorney,
Right.
et cetera. The second then pertains to what information may be released to parties and who may do it.
It's just confusing to me. You know, I understood about student directory data, et cetera, from, being an administrator. And so I know, commercial, agencies would ask, for lists, et cetera, and I knew, that we didn't give or we didn't open up student records, et cetera. But the one that I always was a little unsure of is when you exchange that information with parents, that doesn't always stay right there. We send lists home, classes home, if parents want it, so they can get together with, and it even includes that in here. I mean, I read it, it said that, parents can have class lists and with student phone numbers, et cetera, that are names of students in the classes with their children. And I'm not so sure that that always, remains confidential. Not that I don't trust parents, but, just laying around the house. Kids can exchange it, whatever.
So it seems like as we're looking at
Here it
this,
says, but see, these pages aren't numbered.
And once the strike-throughs are complete, then pageation will come back to it, just given the additions and
Okay.
subtractions.
But what you're saying is that if parents ask for a list of students, now, I would think this pertains more to elementary. If a parent would ask for a list of students in their child's classroom, it looks like this allows the school
Could
to
you-
give that information.
Could you please point to the section that you're referring to?
Oh, gosh. I mean, this was a long thing to read, full of legalese.
as you're looking, let me
Yeah,
just
go ahead
put
and
the
discuss and I'll
context here,
keep
because I
looking.
think what we're seeing, and my question will be really completely different, but is what we include in the data. I mean, that seems like that's kind of the first question we're looking at here in terms of release of student data
Correct.
directory or otherwise.
Correct, and for what
we include
purposes?
and what we
Okay,
don't.
I found it.
And then my question, which we'll get to in a second, which I'll wait with, but I want to ask is accessibility and/or denied accessibility. So I'll come back to that, but let's go, now, she found what you're looking for.
Okay, it's, on, where it says release of student directory data,
Yeah.
then there's a next page and a next page, and it's on the next page. It's on the same page with number 4, challenge amendment of student records, way at the top. And it starts out on the prior page where it says, the administration may release student addresses, telephone numbers to school-related organizations, PTO, PTA, booster clubs, et cetera, and to parents at school for purposes such as parent-to-parent network programs.
Yeah, PTOs, PTAs, booster clubs.
No, but it
Correct.
says, and to parents at schools for purposes as parent-to-parent network program. If I wanna,
If you start out on D, on the prior page, the administration may release students' addresses, telephone numbers to school-related organizations, example PTO, PTA, booster clubs, et cetera, and to parents at schools for purposes such as parent-to-parent networks and programs. So we're really defining what the confines of that release would be.
but there's the end of the parentheses after booster clubs, et cetera, and then it goes on to say, and to parents at school for purposes such as parent-to-parent network programs.
But that might be something like the band parents want to list of the other.
Yeah, but it,
If it just was a parent saying. "Yeah,
or it might want,
everyone's-"
it might be a parent who wants to have a birthday party.
That would be no, that's not a parent-to-parent network program. A network program is something that is formal, is a situation that, there's established organization. It's not just, hey, I want everyone's.
Okay, well then I think that needs to be
I
defined
think
a
that-
little bit more carefully.
I think also to understand that if you go to the beginning, section 3, release of student directory data, the statement begins, except as provided below, directory data may be disclosed as outlined in A through E below, after the school has notified the parent, adult, student, and the public of the categories of information which it designated as a directory data with respect to each student, and has allowed 14 days for the adult student or parent of any minor student to inform the school in writing that all or part of the directory data may not be released. So we're giving parents the opportunity to
Yes,
say, no, I don't
yes.
want to be part of this.
That's true.
And if they choose not to indicate that they don't want to be part of this, then it's okay for us to release the information for PTOs, PTAs, booster clubs, or anything else that would involve that level of networking.
So you don't think that that needs to be a little bit more defined? Where it says, and to parents at school for purposes such as parent-to-parent network programs?
The verbiage in this, while if it's not written in black, this has been reviewed
I know.
by
I am
council,
attorney.
and these are the best recommendations that they have provided to us. This is consistent with, if it's in black, it's what's been in place in Waukesha for a number of years. If it's in red, those were the clarifying pieces that they suggested we add to tighten that up.
Let me just add on, because I'm somewhat on that same place, because my concern really is twofold. I mean, obviously, what is released and to whom, and how can a family opt out? So privacy concerns.
Yep.
So if we're back to number 3 there, on whatever page, old page 7, I think the word only is very important, to the extent that we probably should highlight it. But I guess my concern as we go on to the next page is that there's an interesting presumption here, which is that unless somebody opts out, we can do it, as opposed to requiring permission to release. Do you understand? And I think that's a back door. I have a little concern about that because,
It is.
maybe a family doesn't want it, but, hopefully they would get the message that, oh, by the way. But we all know, maybe the internet would work, maybe a parent would get a letter, and then it might sit in a pile, and then maybe later they'd say, oh my gosh, had I known, I would have opted out. So I think Barb's point is a good one, which is the very limited release. And see, South High School used to publish a directory, which had the parents' names, address, phone number, period, nothing. So pretty harmless. But that was very clear that that's all it was gonna be. But then, when you get into all these other areas, so some military guy comes or whoever wants more information, the parent has to be notified and opt out of releasing that, as opposed to requiring permission to release. Do you understand my point?
At the beginning of the school year, we have a form that
Yeah.
parents fill out, and in it, there's a box that's checked for releasing images for the media. So for instance, the newspaper comes
Yeah.
in or be part of a story. And the other box does indicate opting out of directory data. And so at the beginning of each school year, parents have the option of saying, you cannot use my name, or you can use my name in a student directory
Right, and that's
piece.
just name, address, phone number.
It is all of those areas that are defined in this directory data. So if you were to go to the first page of the policy, the page that's struck out, page 2, directory data is defined by the district, includes all of those areas under D1. And then
But see,
also,
maybe a parent doesn't want anything more than their address and phone number. You're saying date and place of birth, field of study, participation in activities, height and weight? That's all something that we're gonna release?
well.
What we do
if
for
you-
athletics.
Yeah, if you're a wrestler, your height and weight is
Yeah.
released. If you're a football player.
Release to
you're-
whom?
To anybody who shows up at a
For
football game,
sports,
newspapers, colleges.
Programs.
I mean, it's all
Okay.
built into the athletic program. You go to the football game, you see number 75, Joe Cook,
So a
6'2".
parent of an athlete gets a different letter.
well, the parent, they get the same letter and they still have the ability to opt out, if that is their choice.
And what about place of birth, major field of study?
This is FERPA language, so this goes right to the federal, the Family Educational Records Protection Act. So this goes right to FERPA's language.
And you don't think that might be a violation of privacy? What if somebody doesn't want that in there? I mean, I thought when we said directory, so that's why I'm looking at this, kind of like Barb, that we mean name, address, telephone number. If you're an athlete, the parent could sign a permission form. It's fine to release statistics that are necessary, weight, height, pretty much it, right?
So we say this is what is going in the directory, you can opt out of it, though.
As opposed to saying we need your permission to
Yeah.
put it in.
Yeah.
See, that's the back door I have.
Well,
problems
I think that's what how the DPI, how they have it in their directory reg.
But we don't have student
Okay.
directories of that information, do we?
It doesn't all go.
No.
Yeah, so most of that doesn't go.
But I mean, we're able to protect, like
okay.
earlier this year, we had a request by the, one of the school choice programs for all the names and addresses of the students, and the policy gives us discretion to say, we don't have to send that, because it's for solicitation purposes. So, I mean,
Okay, but that's for profit, that's covered.
well, or it could be for not-for-profit if it's for solicitation purposes, which is what it was for. But,
Yeah,
in the particular case, the only time we get the request is usually law enforcement. I don't know how many requests we've gotten from military, but the other one are, the Milwaukee Journal or the Freeman will ask for height and weights of the players, and we also put it on the programs in respective sports.
I know, but that's the athletic,
Right.
okay. Let me first have, Karen wanted to.
Thank you. I just, as you guys were talking about student directory, when the kids were at Higher, we got a Higher student directory. It was Higher Hawks, and all it would say, let's say it'd be, right, if I wanted to have a birthday party or anything, I would just look up, or it was helpful when writing out thank yous, because the kids were coming, there's a birthday party, but then to send a thank you, I needed an actual address. So I would just look it up in the Higher Hawks. It was only names, addresses, telephone numbers, and I don't even think there was email back then. I mean,
No.
it probably was, but it might not have been on there. With STEM, so there's a release in the beginning of the year, and I forget if it was just an all-school release or if it was just for that location, but it just said, would you like to be included in the student directory? So it's asking us if we would like to opt in. It wasn't saying, would we like to opt out? And so there was other things on there, like would we want the kids' photos taken, and a few other things. So I knew that we were opting in, and that was fine. I'm with the ladies about the opting out. Right, that seems a little bit more.
So I think when you're asking your questions about directory data, there's a broader definition of directory data as it pertains to FERPA, and that would be any identifiable information that is associated with a student that we might collect. That is in D1 there. Directory data that would be provided in a phone book, such as something that's collected by a school, would be another type of directory, not the formal definition under FERPA of what a student directory data is. That has a very specific definition under FERPA, and those are included in D1 and 2 of this document. The student directory that you might get from the school, where you're including your name, address, and phone number, it's almost like a student phone book, student directory that you'd be looking at. That is separate than from what this federal definition of directory data is.
Well, then we need to be specific about that, because let's say I'm a new parent, and I'm not, but let's say I were, I might say, okay, if I have the choice, I'll opt in, of course, to have my student listed in the STEM, and my family. Name, address, phone number, email, period, right? I don't think people necessarily care about what they did, Why would we do place of birth, major field of study? See, I don't get that. I mean.
Is that the
I
law?
think we have to be
That is the
more
law, that's the
specific.
legal definition of a
Should we,
directory data.
But just to pursue that, legal definition means we have to release that, or no? Don't we have the option not to?
That, when you're looking at the policy to define the scope of what directory data is, that is where it's outlined in FERPA. And then if you were to look at one of the areas that's referenced in this policy, it is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Under the references, we do need in a student records policy to cover FERPA to address what FERPA says about directory data and student records. If there's additional language that's needed to clarify what would be considered a student telephone directory, as the example was provided, we can go on to talk about that and define that. But I think we should be cautious about trying to veer too far away about what the federal guideline says or the federal definition of a directory data is.
should we refer to that federal law?
And I did make note on there
Where
that
is
just says
that?
directory data as defined in FERPA. I put that on my policy, or on my copy, that if we were to need to provide further clarification of where this definition is coming from, we could
I'd
do
be
that.
more comfortable if you included that.
I still think we ought to have two definitions, and if you like the federal government mandating, which it sounds to me like you're saying they're mandating it, which I don't approve of, but mandating that we force all our families to, I mean, some families might not even want their phone number released.
That's
Well,
true.
we just went through this with our attorneys when we had that request, and they reviewed this, and they didn't recommend any changes, nor did they say, this was too much or not enough.
Well, they didn't know our concerns, I mean, bless their little attorney hearts, but they didn't know what we're concerned about, I suppose, because obviously they didn't address it.
They're not representing the people's voice
No.
of Waukesha.
And again, I mean, it may seem like a small thing, but I don't think so. I think we ought to give people the right to opt in and not come and say, the federal government for blah, 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 says that this will all be released unless you opt out. I mean, that seems extraordinarily intrusive to me.
But again, I think that we're looking at the definition of what it is, and when you go to the page that is, the strikeout, page 7, release of student data, that is what we would be sharing, with families. And if there's concerns about disclosure of records, we could perhaps look at this section to see what in this section that the district would disclose, would be concerning to the board, or the committee. Again, the first page is the definition under FERPA of what directory data is. Similar to what the IDEA definition of cognitive disability might be per se, or specific learning disability. And then if we were to come ahead here, we can take a look at what the district would disclose, because this summarizes that release of student directory data here. And then we could talk about where the concerns lie.
Well, but I think we're being real clear as where our concerns lie, which is we're still backdooring it. If you have to opt out, to me, that's a backdoor. And the potential invasion of privacy situation is really a big one. So the way that this is worded, to me, is not right. I mean, and I'll get to you in a minute, but, even back when all of us were applying to college, in order to have my high school records or transcripts released, I had to sign a release form. So it was done with positive permission approach, not backdoor. Go ahead.
On page 8, that's crossed out above that, it says, the administration may release student directory data for school-related purposes such as athletics, extracurriculars, yearbooks, parent-student directories. In addition, high school principals may release student directory data to vendors of graduation announcements, class rings, senior pictures. So there's one side that says, okay, the newspaper's going to use it for height and weight of athletics, and other parents want to use names and addresses for birthday parties. But I look at this and I think, okay, anyone can pose as a photographer and just say, yep, I would like to give you a great price on student pictures. Can I have the data of how many are we talking about here? However salesmen do it. And before you know it, someone else outside of our circle has it. I mean, just like that. Okay, and then I just wanted to point out one other thing. I think it's a typo, I hope it is, on, let's see, the second to last page. How about if we try to do it that way? On number 7, destruction of student records. On B, line 42B, the district shall destroy, maintain behavioral records for no longer than 1 year. Which one is it? Destroy or maintain?
Yeah, good catch.
Thank
It's
you.
implying it's maintained, but I don't know how destroy worked in there.
What does the document that came from us, again, the strike through, perhaps is, it should be,
Well, that would have to be maintained.
yeah, it should be maintained for no longer than 1 year.
So,
Thank you very much.
what are you gonna get rid of, destroy?
We'll get rid of destroy, keep maintain.
Yeah, and that's an
Good
interesting
catch.
policy too, because people used to go, you know, I'm sorry, but like with a mass murderer, which I luckily didn't go to high school with any, but there was someone who I remember all of a sudden, all the data of what that person had been involved in high school came out, and he was like 29 years old and was killing people in Illinois or something. Not that that's ever gonna happen here, and that's fine. But what we're saying is if that person had been gone for more than a year, psh, they're gone. They're like invisible, they never went here? Is that right?
It's not that they had never gone to school here, we would be destroying the records that are sitting in our files for students 1 year after graduation.
And how do we verify that they went here then?
They would still be on our, when you look ahead, I guess I would say, I'm sorry, look to section A, the district shall maintain all students' progress records for 60 years. That is the transcript that we would maintain, so the transcript is still gonna be here. Behavioral records would be suspensions, truancy issues, detentions that were assigned that are maintained in a behavior file for students. Those are discarded after a year of the student being in the district, destroyed.
What you just read to us, where is that?
It's in A above the, it's
the red.
7A, the
Destruction of.
Oh, okay, right
destruction of
before
student records.
destroy, maintain.
Yep.
Okay, so, but again, that's just the basic rubric. All student progress records, so we know what that is. We're kind of comfortable with that, I suppose.
Correct, that's the transcript, the high school transcript of students after they graduate.
Is all
Okay.
that you keep in.
I.e. transcript.
Yes.
All behavioral records or health records, everything else is
Everything
destroyed.
else is destroyed. That's
How do we destroy that?
The paper files are shredded. The electronic files, if you were to flip ahead, to, let me see where it says electronic records, I apologize. It's a long paragraph in red. Can you help me with the electronic records?
Alan, there is a mention of purple here.
Yeah.
If you were to look ahead, I'm sorry, it's the next page under C. The Assistant Superintendent of Student Services shall be responsible for reviewing records of students with special education needs. If you go down farther in that, if the parent or adult student does not give consent, the district will remove the personal identifiers from the records. And this is referring to electronic records, so that they're no longer pupil records and may be maintained for the current fiscal year plus 4 more years. And that was at the beginning of our conversation around this. That was for the federal audit purposes. And that's where the electronic records piece comes in, so our files that are kept in Infinite Campus now.
And then you had the 4-year clause. That was another one back here.
Correct, yeah, so, the federal government will come in occasionally, or the state will come in and do, special education audits, and that requires us look back on 5 years of records, from time to time, and as part of that, we wanna be able to maintain the electronic record, of students who have given us consent, In addition to that, for families that have given us consent, we're able to generate a copy of the IEP for students who are going on to college that, perhaps are 23, 24 years old and do not have their last copy of an IEP or an evaluation. But if they don't give us consent to maintain those records, then we no longer have to maintain that record any farther out.
So if they're 27 or 28,
We do not have-
there's no real evidence that they, were receiving special education services.
Outside of the files that we provided to them on an annual basis. We do provide a hard copy of each annual IEP, and every 3 years, we provide a hard copy of the reevaluation.
To whom?
To the parent and to the student, once the student turns
Okay.
18 years old.
Okay. May I ask a
Yes.
question? Is it common practice, or is it practice at every school, I don't know about high school, but elementary school, that they have student directories that they distribute to parents? Because it's not something that,
It's school by school. And
it's up to the school to do that?
Yeah.
Because, we didn't do that, so, but that was not a parent expectation at that time, et cetera. So I just wondered if that was a parent expectation, that the school was going to hand out a directory, or it's up to the school?
I don't know
or
if it's a parent, it's
It's,
like a PTO might
PTO.
manage it, request it, and their, parents will opt out of that if they don't want to.
but, as a matter of practice, do schools, put together a student directory and just disseminate it to all parents in the school?
I don't know if it's a matter of practice, like I said, it's school by school.
It
I'd
could
have to-
happen.
We'd have to take a poll. I know it's not done at the high schools,
Not
but
important.
there might be some elementaries. that
I
do it.
just guess that one sentence might be misunderstood, so.
There's
Well,
not-
yeah.
I don't even know why it's in there. It doesn't really make sense, because it's not specific. And to parents at school for purposes such as parent-to-parent network programs. I might not understand what that means, so I'm not sure why that even has to be there.
Okay, and I think to Barb's point earlier, and then I don't mean to cut you off, you found them mentioned one place in here for, but I think we ought to lead off, because we're referring to DPI and state statute a couple times in here, and I circled it. But since FERPA seems to be in many ways the sort of guiding light here, I think we better be real clear and refer to them specifically, or refer to that act and that policy specifically in here, so that future committees and/or parents or whatever, would have that as a guide. Because we do, when we talk about DPI and Wisconsin statutes, this is real good, and it gives you the citation, but not with FERPA. I had also another question, so I'm just trying to find the page. After you see that page 7 crossed out, go to the very next page.
Yep.
And when it looks at, like, at C, high school principals shall, upon request by military recruiters or institutions of higher learning, provide the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of high school students. Doesn't a student have to sign a release form, or a parent guardian?
For the military, I can speak that I do not believe that military recruiters need to have a release in there for student information. For institutions of higher learning, I don't want to make any assumptions as to what this policy says they should be doing or not. If I were to assume, it would be after students have applied or expressed interest in a college, that information would come from the school.
Right, but we don't state that,
And
okay?
we could, sure,
And
absolutely.
it seems to me that the military ought to be restricted to the same. I mean, if somebody's applying to be in the military, because we don't have an active draft, so we're not talking about that right now. Obviously, that could change things, but right now, we don't have a draft, so there's not an unwilling person getting grabbed into the military, right? So because we have no draft, then I think we ought to treat the military the same as we do institutions of higher learning. And the student involved needs to sign a release form that we can release information to.
But we're not releasing grades, it's just the,
Name,
Name,
address,
address,
yeah.
that's all, that's all they would. I mean, I recall in high school getting a number
Oh.
of postcards and so on from different
Absolutely.
state universities.
Absolutely.
Just saying, here's a open campus day or camp visit day,
Yeah.
but nothing else.
Yeah.
And the only ones that were sent my data were ones that I was applying to, and again, I signed off on them.
And then you had to sign off.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is just name, address, and telephone number, so, they can send that information out.
But usually, at least colleges used to get that from Iowa City or the College Board. They got it from ACT or SAT lists,
But it
not
would-
from the high schools.
Now they can,
Now,
now they can,
maybe-
everyone taking ACT, so they'll get everyone now.
Well, they do. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's where those lists came from. And the ACT, and there's a whole nother thing, but they would often sell them by what your scores were. Because some colleges would say, I'd only like to know the scores of people who got, you know. But that's not our problem because that's separate. But where do we then state that you need permission if you are the military or an institution of higher learning?
Well, again, I think
Where do we
it comes-
state that?
I think it comes down to the parents and students, adult students have the 14 days.
Yeah,
to-
but I don't like that. I mean, I really stick with that. Opt-out, I don't like. I think we gotta get signed permission to release whatever it is we're releasing. You know, because we're saying 15 days, you know, that can fly by in a heartbeat, and in a lot of families, and certainly we all try to be as efficient as we can in every family, you know, but 2 weeks isn't much, and, you know, people may not understand that they have to opt out. I mean, it's like,
That is true.
I just have problems with that, in terms of protecting people's
Well, I
privacy.
think, I'd like to review it with our attorneys, because we could be
Okay.
potentially creating a legal liability for ourselves if everyone has to opt in and something goes out accidentally and then, you know, versus opting out. I think we should check on that, so we're not creating
I think so.
a new higher level of liability in the case some information goes out.
Well, and again, that gets back to where we started, so, you know, sorry to do this to you, but name, address, phone number, email, you know, that, to me, is kind of in a different ballpark. But then we're seeing a lot of other things here, including transcripts, behavioral records, you know, what have you. And I'm not talking about athletes. But to have it be that passive, oh, oops, you forgot to opt out, I have a real problem with that in terms of invasion of privacy. And so, yeah, I mean, our attorneys can look at it, but I just think it's a real slippery slope, that backdoor stuff.
Is this based on state law?
The federal
What they
law-
tell us, federal, who dictates what we have to do? State, federal?
Well, if you go to the reference pages, the last page, you'll see the Wisconsin state statutes. The following ones are referenced.
Okay.
Chapter 118 of the Administrative
Okay, right.
Code, the Family and Educational Rights and Privacy Act, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Both of those two are federal acts.
Okay.
And then the Federal Internal Revenue Code is also included in this. Again, many of these statements in black have been in practice since 2004. And there are portions of this that have been updated to match what the recent FERPA revisions have included. And also to reflect the changing times from 2004 to 2015.
But you understand, I think all three of us have some of the same concerns. And
Well, like I
so-
said, I think, well, we can review it with the,
Okay.
with the attorneys. The other piece, I think we may have to make some changes, because I don't want to be in a position where the DA comes looking for records for a criminal complaint,
Right.
and we'll say, well, the parent didn't opt in, we can't give you
Yeah.
those. I think we're gonna have a whole
We are.
pretty
I
bad
agree,
PR.
but I think
agree.
we have to be
I
really
agree.
clear, which is, okay, then is the DA of Waukesha County needs to issue a written request to us? I mean, I'm just saying, let's ask our attorneys to clarify that, because, I mean, I think, you know, for a criminal or whatever case, they're gonna wanna come and get some records, but then why not have a written request from the DA or a written, do you understand?
Yeah, and they do. That's-
Yeah,
They either
okay.
come via email or hard copy.
Right, but
Yeah.
again, I don't think we're saying that. And also when we say all the references, I guess my question, Joe, because, you know, you probably don't want this to go on any longer than it already is, but FERPA and these others, and the DPI and everything, where they are definitional as to what is what and how we define it, as opposed to where they are mandates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really a big difference. So,
Difference.
do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, if you could just clarify a little bit, districts are required to follow the practices outlined in FERPA.
And
FERPA
those
does provide us some definitions as to.
Definitions.
Yeah, so we can clarify, I guess, if we're going to page 2, could definitely add the, FERPA definition of directory data, if that would help bring some.
That would help.
Bring some clarification, but, if the district were in a situation where there was a challenge to student records, that challenge would come to us as a FERPA violation. I mean, recently at the university level, the use of, and I guess this probably isn't even recent, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the use of social security numbers as student identification numbers at
yes.
the college level.
Oh, yes.
FERPA stepped in and said you cannot use that as the defining piece.
That was my identification.
Where FERPA, the Education Act, and HIPAA, the Medical Records Act, starts to overlay, that really starts to fall into Section 504, falls into special education. Oftentimes, we're delivered a report from a private psychologist, and we need to be very protective of how we maintain that. So there's a little bit of overlays between HIPAA and FERPA. So I guess when I mandated or the things that we must follow, that does start at the federal level with the Education Act, and then that filters down through state statute and gives us then the leverage to set a board policy that satisfies those and then also meets the local need.
Yes.
So I guess, just so I'm clear, as we go back to take a look at this, I'll provide some of the clarification based off of the conversation. I'll add that in redlined, and we will be bringing that then back in June. As we get together, and then.
For the board meeting? No.
No,
for
I
policy.
believe just given the conversation, we should be having 2 readings.
Yeah, I agree.
On this
Oh, yeah.
policy. Probably
I
will
agree.
report out to the board and.
But it won't be before the June board meeting, it'll be after.
Correct.
But before the July board meeting.
Before it goes into,
Got
goes into policy.
Right.
No, that's fair enough, and I hope you understand our concerns.
Absolutely.
And it seems to me, and I think in this case, the government probably is trying to be above board, but since this FERPA basically stands for not just definitions, but kind of the right to privacy, is one of the spirits upon which it was based,
Yep.
then I think we need to spell out what are your protections under the rights to privacy. Because that's something that families should be, and I'm sure are, concerned about. And if it means that nothing's released unless you give permission, or that nothing beyond these 3, things are released unless you give permission, then I think we need to spell that out for families. And you don't necessarily have to opt out. You have to give active permission. So, I think we need to, that's the way I feel anyway.
Just one
Yeah.
more thing. Just take a look again, Joe, about that one sentence, to parents at school for purposes such as parent-to-parent network. Maybe we could be a little bit more specific there so that as a parent, I don't misunderstand. So just take a look at that one more time, please.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry
Then
to
I'm
do this.
comfortable.
It's always crazy when you,
Oh,
it's
my
like
gosh.
writing laws, always say you don't want to watch laws written in sausage made, right?
Karen has a comment.
Yeah, Karen.
Thank you. This was back a while ago. I know we're past that, but I just wanted to, when we're talking about sports and height and weight and all that kind of thing, then when an athlete signs up for a sport, we sometimes will get a basketball roster of the kids on our team or football, and that helps when I think, oh, actually they're right down the road. We might as well carpool. That's something that if I want that, I can opt into. So let's say you're filling out your paperwork for sports, your concussion paper, and all the other papers, and your fee. There could be a paper in there, would you like to opt into a directory? Or let's say the high school, for the military and the colleges. When you're filling out your paperwork for the high school, then that's just one of the areas where a parent would check. Personally, I don't need 100 flyers coming to my house for every college, but I understand that's how they advertise, but I will give permission for that. It's not their right to just have that openly. I just feel that if we're asked for permission for what we want our children to be in, they're our kids until they're 18. And that authority is being taken when it's either all or nothing right now. If we opt out of nothing, then no, our kids' height and weight can't be in the paper, and sorry to keep bringing that up, but no, the kids can't share phone numbers for the birthday party. It's completely no, or it's completely everything is exposed for every single person. Why does it have to be like that? Why can't it be, I will give you permission for what I
Well,
think that you should
you're
have?
probably talking about a couple 100,000 pieces of paper for one, but again, there's potential liability. Let's say that you're on the football team and you inadvertently don't opt in to have your height, weight, and they publish a schedule and they miss that, and they publish a person's height and weight. Now we've got a potential lawsuit on our hands that we wouldn't have had with the opt-out or some other form of opting out.
And I understand, but how did it get that far, you know? Then they should have done,
Well, I think when you sign the athletic code, you recognize that players' information, including height and weight, may be published in a schedule or a program.
and you
Then
know,
that's active permission,
yeah, and that just.
passive.
That
Yeah.
just seems so small. Like, that is fine compared to Jeffrey Dahmer knowing what size my kids are and what he wants to, it's just, there are gross people out there. There's good and evil, and we all know there's evil people, and we all know they prowl around and do horrible things. The last thing that I would want is to have given them the information to kids when their parents didn't sign off on that. There's just, we don't want to think like that. We don't want to think that there's.
Well, like I said, I think we should review this with attorneys, because if we're gonna go in that direction, I want to make sure we're not creating another set of legal liabilities for the district. And second of all, you're talking about a pretty massive amount of paperwork. If it's an opt-out for everything, for example, we have art displays at South, beautiful artwork, and their names are on those in those grades. Now we need to opt in for that. Anytime they're in a sport, whether it's football, basketball, so they'll need an opt in for a couple of different sports, for a lot of other things. Now, I mean, you're talking about a pretty massively big
Isn't
set of
there
paperwork.
a happy medium?
I don't know. I mean, it depends
Is there
on how
another
much.
district maybe that has done this where they haven't said, okay, access to everything for everyone?
Maybe a small district, but like I said, you've got 14,000 students. You're looking at 14,000 opt-ins times how many events they might be in. So I just, like I said, I'd like to review this with the attorney to make sure that the opt-in isn't setting us up for another legal hurdle down the road.
Okay. I understand.
So we'll hear back from you on that. And I think that 5145.1 speaks to the same thing, but since we're rolling into that next and it's really related, if you look, Joe, at that first page, lines 12, 13, 14, the school board by this policy protects safety and rights of students, which I certainly agree with, under its care, cooperating with local law enforcement and military recruiters. How come they're put in here with local law enforcement? It seems to me that they really would be more in the category of a college or university or something.
Unless it pertains to needing the requirement to register with selective services, which not everybody has to go to college, but you all have to register. I think that therein lies the issue. Also, and this is my experience having worked in schools, we will get additional if a student, a recent graduate, or somebody who is involved in a kind of an early admission program into the military, and I believe that they'll allow students who turn 18 prior to their senior year to do boot camp before the school year starts. I don't know if that's still in place, but for certain promotions in the military and the federal government, without consent of the applicant, will come into the school and look for behavioral records. on students to determine if their character is such that they can either sit in that position or receive promotion. And that has been practice going back. The first time I received that request was almost 10 years ago in a teaching position to talk to a military personnel about a former student. So I do believe that they've got a little bit broader reach than what a university would have as it pertains to a student record. The only update to this policy, though, and I just would point out that this goes back to February 11th, 2004,
Yeah, there's
is
just
the
one.
addition of behavioral records on page 3 of the policy. So that would be the only change from past practice.
So the SRO has access to that. But again, the emphasis on all of this is the police, and I understand the need for that, and I mean, obviously we do. But I guess throwing the military in here, other than the 18-year-olds where they have to go and register, I still don't quite get that. But, I mean, I think our military, it seems to me, shouldn't be able to do that without permission. And if a student doesn't sign or a permission for the military to do it,
And they don't get the
do it,
promotion.
then maybe you don't get your promotion.
Get the promotion.
Because the military might think you're hiding something, and maybe you are. So, I don't know, it just seems confusing to conflate these two, because they're really, other than, as you say, selective service, they're very, very different.
Well, we may also want to check, I mean, this refers to ESEA, and I want to make sure that we don't, if we pull the military off the list, we don't lose our federal
Yeah,
funding. There may
right.
be some
Gotta be
things tied to that, and as I look at the ESEA requirements, there may be some things there that in order to, we have a lot of requirements to receive various federal funds, as Joe can tell you, and that's another one we better check to make sure.
Sure.
If we push them out of the policy, could we get, and unfortunately, they do put stuff like that in along with the dollars and cents they send us.
Well, and I think you're right to check. I mean, I know college campuses, and obviously this was a couple decades ago when the military was very unpopular, and now it isn't. But they wouldn't even let recruiters on campus, and yet some of those same universities were getting federal funding. So as you say, we better check. But can be a hot button, yes.
One more question. When a student is being considered for one of our United States military academies, I'm sure they're going to want very detailed information. Now, does the student have to give them permission to
Oh, I would
seek
hope
that
They would
information?
be applying, that would be like applying to a
Okay.
Right,
university.
fine, yeah.
I mean, they have to go get the Senate recommendations, and so.
Right.
That's that's clearly an opt-in, in that
Right.
particular case.
They have to sign the release form.
I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, that would be,
'Cause
that's a whole
boy,
different
they dig
level.
deep.
They
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Sorry, one last thing.
That's right.
Is this a Waukesha record? Has any policy meeting ever had 55 minutes on one policy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Normally, they're not this
I
long,
wanna
but
set a record.
we
can keep
unfortunately,
talking.
we've had some,
There've been some hot
we've
items.
had some hot items in the past.
Oh.
I've been on it for, I don't know, almost 20 years.
Yeah,
and
you
there's-
have, you have.
been-
I was on it,
there've been hot
a long
items.
time ago.
Straight?
Okay, well
Yeah.
then, let's move along, because we did, and
Great.
thank you for your patience and notes, Joe and Todd. So section 504 is a potentially new policy, so if everyone has that, I believe it's right here. And I don't know, Todd or Joe, who's gonna,
Joe's the 504 guy.
you're the 504, Joe, okay.
Just a little bit of history, recent history. In 2009, the Americans with Disabilities Act was revised, reauthorized at the federal level, and the umbrella of 504 got a little bit bigger. Our requests for 504 evaluations in the district has risen steadily over the past few years. In addition to that, we've had a couple of opportunities to work with the Office of Civil Rights out of Chicago, and in talking with them this past year, they start at the policy conversation. What does the board dictate, for policy as it pertains to this? Last month, I brought to you the service animals policy.
Right.
The service animals policy is supported by the 504 policy, and I held off a month to bring this to you, only because some of our neighboring districts had their policies under review by the Office of Civil Rights to see if they were still in compliance, which they were. So we've made sure that our policy is in a line there. We, as a district right now, have approximately 100 504 plans
Do
for
we
students.
really?
And I only see that, I only see the request for 504 growing for
yes.
students.
Sure.
So it's good to have a sound policy and procedure in place to try to address the 504 evaluation and the placement of students, or the access of students to accommodations under 504.
Yeah, Ms. Brzee?
504, as you know, is probably one of the most misunderstood services a school district can provide. People misunderstand, and they'll always say, well, my student is a 504 student, and they don't even know. I'm really, really pleased to see that we're going to have some policy that talks about 504, because this is needed.
Yep.
And I see it's based on reference to, is that state law, federal law? IDEA is federal law. What
The
is?
IDA is federal, also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is
That's
also
federal law
federal.
too,
So
yeah.
this has got
We-
Section 504,
Oh,
ADA, Title
needed.
II implications. So it does have some broader implications for us as a district.
But Joe, do we still interpret the child's needs? Do we still interpret the need for 504 based on what we believe is indeed a legitimate need?
Yeah, so we're looking at using, to try to look at this in its entirety. In order to come to the point where you're saying that a student needs accommodations to access their education, you need to go through some sort of evaluation process to do that.
Absolutely.
That evaluation for 504 in Waukesha will mirror what we do for special education. So from referral to consent to
Right.
process to evaluate to determining if the 504 plan is
Right.
appropriate or not. We can take into consideration information from doctors, from private psychologists and things like that when we build this plan. But ultimately, it's a school team that includes the parents to talk about the need for accommodations in the K-12 setting.
But a 504 plan is not necessarily based upon a doctor's recommendation.
No, the doctor's information, though, can factor
Can be
into our-
helpful.
Absolutely,
Right,
yes.
right. Thank you.
Okay, and since that was potential new policy, we'll revisit it in our next meeting. And then bring it maybe even in August.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
And 504, really, I think the service animals 5140 kind of goes with it. So
Correct.
we'll bring both of those back.
Yes.
Okay, and if there are other questions, we can raise those at that time, but I don't have any, I think they're very clear.
Section 504 is up for action tonight.
Yes, it is.
You know, it is, and so was the other one, but we decided to defer it. Did you want us to vote to defer it?
Nope.
Okay, we'll
Nope.
just say we're deferring it.
Correct. That one's going to come back,
Okay,
but section 504 is up for action.
all right, but it would come forward in our June meeting and then be voted on our July meeting.
Correct.
Okay. Do I hear a motion then for 504? Not the service animals.
On a motion to approve?
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, I'll move to approve potential new policy, section 504 is presented.
No second?
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, 3-0. So then we'll bring it June 10th and then back in July, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then we'll revisit the service animals, so we can bring that forward later as an action item. But it's not tonight, right?
The next two items already had a first reading at the May full board meeting.
We did.
So 5117G and the service animal policies had a first reading.
Yes, we
I
did.
did not receive any feedback from board members, but it's just here on the agenda in case you had heard anything or wanted to make any
Oh,
revisions or
I-
anything
I just-
before.
I just have one thing I'd like to add. It's on line 47 under D.
Which,
Which
I'm
policy?
sorry, 5117G, 5117G.
Oh, guidelines.
Just because this has come up from time to time, and I thought, well, maybe this is a good time to add it, but where it says approved transfer requests do not need, I'd like to say approved transfer requests for a specific school do not need to be resubmitted annually. Because what happens sometimes, let's say that they choice to Blair, okay? And they're in the Horning attendance area, they assume automatically they're going to Butler. Well, Butler's closed.
Yeah.
Because it's overcrowded. And that maybe takes away that assumption that I automatically go with where the Blair kids go. Now I have to reapply for Butler, and if it's closed, then I have to consider my attendance area school or maybe another middle school.
So do we need a motion to amend that?
Well, right, because what you're saying, and since I'm just catching up on being policy,
Yeah.
is that at our last board meeting, this received a first reading, but it received it erroneously, is what we're saying.
Oh, it wasn't wrong, I'm just
No,
asking to add this
to
now
amend it,
based
to
on
amend it.
issues that have come up
Right, so we want to
recently.
amend it, so then does that mean you tell me that we have to bring it forward in June and July then?
I don't think you have to do another reading. It's
Okay.
been for one reading, it'll be a second reading
As
in
amended?
June. Yeah,
Amended.
yeah. And this is not
I
a,
need to know.
this really doesn't change the outcome of the paragraph. It's
Amendment.
intended
Right.
to say that, once you
Okay,
choice into a school, you get to stay there, but it's just to help people understand
for
that
a specific
if you're,
school.
if you're in elementary, it doesn't guarantee you
Okay,
into the feeder middle school.
So do we need an amendment?
yeah, so we probably have to approve that amendment, and then we'll just mention that it is being
Yeah.
brought forward as
Yeah.
amended.
Okay, so you.
I'll put that in your script, and
Okay.
it'll also be in the executive summary that at this meeting, we added this language on line 47, et cetera.
And you don't need a motion.
I
We
think-
should
we
have,
probably
we should
should,
vote on
yeah.
it.
All right, I'll move to amend policy number 5117G as amended.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we know what we're bringing forward, and we will also bring forward potential new policy 504 for a first reading. Okay, and then we will just mention that the revision to 5125, that we're looking at that. Is that, unless you guys get this all done by a week or so.
I would defer to Todd, but I don't even think we'd bring that up at full board unless you want to mention we're reviewing it.
Well, sometimes it just isn't information that we're kind of looking at.
Just,
It's-
I
I
wouldn't
would
go
just say
into
we're,
it. I
yeah,
won't go
we're,
into it.
we're
Right.
reviewing some concerns that were brought forward by the committee,
Fine,
and we'll bring it
That's
back.
all it
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
fine.
So just to clarify, we're going to have section 504 will go to the full board for a first reading. 5117G on school attendance areas and the service animals policy will both be going for approval at the June full board meeting.
So there'll be action in June.
Correct, yeah. Okay,